I'd like to invite Mr. Vinay Sharma, former Global Director of World Bank, to the stage for his presentation on the challenges and opportunities in international procurement. Mr. Vinay Sharma, a highly experienced leader with over 35 years in public procurement, policy formulation, and project management. Until June 2022, Mr. Sharma has served as a Global Director and Senior Advisor for Procurement at the World Bank's Governance Unit. Prior to this, he spent 14 years at the African Development Bank, leading procurement and fiduciary services and shaping a new procurement policy for the organization. Vinay also held key roles at Delhi Metro Rail Corporations and Indian Railways, providing him with deep insights into procurement from the borrower's perspective. A civil engineer by training, his career is marked by impactful reforms and strategic alliances. The floor is all yours, Mr. Vinay.
Thank you, Annie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I would need assistance with someone to help me with my presentation, please.
Sure.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me first of all thank the PPPAI, the organizers of this workshop, of this event, Mr. Batra, friends with the World Bank, and everyone who's been associated with this event for having invited me. I have been asked to speak on international procurement, the challenges and opportunities that it presents. And the next 30 minutes or so, I'd be doing this. As I have been associated almost all my life with the public side of procurement, you'd probably see a slight bias in my presentation. So with this, I seek your indulgence. And can I have the next slide, please? Now, as you know, procurement is a crucial part of global trade. And it is also a crucial part of the services that the state provides to its citizens. It influences in a very principled way the economic activity of any business or the services or the economic activity of a state. We talk about the size of public procurement in the next couple of slides. But what is important is that procurement actually, public procurement particularly, has a very important role to play in economic growth, not only the volume of economic growth, but also the type of economic growth that a country sees. There is an impact on resilience and there is an impact on development, the kind of development that takes place through public procurement. We would be discussing in this short presentation the challenges and the opportunities that international or global procurement presents. Obviously, this is a subject which is extremely vast. It could take days of discussions. What I'll try to do is to simplify things and then bring it into a smaller capsule for our discussion today. So we would be discussing the dual side of international procurement, which includes the opportunities that it presents and also the challenges that come with public procurement. But before that, let me try and lay the complex web of the contextual factors that impact public procurement in general and international procurement in particular. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so there was a study that had used data of 2018, and this study, which is a peer-reviewed study, found that the total volume of public procurement is about $13 trillion. This was at a time when the global GDP was about $100 trillion. So, around 13% of the global GDP was public procurement. The variation is there across countries. There are countries where the state's role is greater than in other countries and so on. But around 12, 13, 14%. In some countries, of course, it has gone beyond 20% as well. But it is generally between 10 to 20% of GDP in most countries. And because of the large volume of procurement which is involved, it also has a potential for rent seeking. So clearly, when we talk about large contracts, when we're talking about contracts that span geographically the whole geography of countries, we are talking about rent seeking. We are talking about the possibilities of inefficiencies, not only inefficiencies in administering procurement, which are passive inefficiencies, but also losses that come through fraud and corruption. So there has been an estimate that between 10 to 25% of the total volume of public procurement globally is lost to corruption. So that is one of the factors that will have to be seen whenever any reform proposal is to take place. So there are studies that have also shown that the inactive losses, which is the losses because of bureaucracy, because of how processes happen, that can add another 10 to 20% of the total volume of procurement. So we are really talking about 30 to 40% of opportunity that is available with us if public procurement was to improve. So let me also talk about why international procurement has taken this central role today. What are the contextual factors? And for this, may I go to the next slide, please? Now, as you know, there have been many global challenges that the world has seen or the world is seeing today. One of the most important challenge that the world has seen, at least in recent years or at least in recent generations, has been the global COVID pandemic. But there are others. There are other factors. The geopolitical crisis that is taking place in the Russia-Ukraine war or in the Middle East that we are seeing today. These have actually exposed the vulnerabilities of global supply chains. And what it has shown very clearly is the need for a global consensus of collaboration that takes place whenever the world is faced with such global crisis. And there have been studies that have shown that the number of crises have actually gone up in recent years. What used to be once in a century event is now becoming once in a decade incident, and so on. So there is a need for global collaboration, for a global dialogue, and I don't think there has been something this has been shown as starkly as what we saw in COVID, where countries were not collaborating with each other; they were actually competing with each other. We had situations where suppliers, were asked to supply something. They had, written contracts, and some other country with more money would go to them and get the same stuff at higher cost. So, so clearly it was, some of the developing countries that lost out because of this. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, what did the world do? One of the crisis that is normally, when we talk about global crisis, the other crisis that had struck the world was the financial crisis in 2008. And at that time, there was a great deal of state activity, and there were the countries tried to reignite the economy by injecting stimulus, and this is what they did in COVID, except that in COVID, the volume was much higher. Now, the governments had realized that procurement can be a powerful policy tool to stimulate economies and to ensure proper service delivery. And as you would see from this chart, the world spent over $10 trillion in the first 2 months of the crisis to stabilize economies, because everything shut down. There were economic activity wasn't there. People were getting into poverty. All the gains that had been made by the development institutions in the last many decades were feared that we are going to lose them, and therefore the government started pumping money into the economy to ignite it. And the budget deficits that were already bad in the pre-COVID era, they became worse after post-COVID, because the governments had to. So it was a very difficult choice for the governments, but they did it. A large sums of money were injected into this, and the implementation of those injections were largely through public procurement, through the state buying, infrastructure contracts and so on and so forth. And as a percentage of GDP, this completely outsized the total amount of economic stimulus which was provided, about 12 years ago in the financial crisis that the world had seen. So can we go to the next slide, please? Now, as a magnitude of public expenditure, countries took various measures to support businesses. And there are businesses with deep pockets that can survive months of inactivity or months of low growth and so on. But there are companies that are so dependent on day-to-day contracts that if there is a stoppage of economic activity, then clearly they are going to go under, and these are vulnerable companies. So the countries, they started taking various measures to support businesses, particularly for SMEs, to protect against supply chain disruptions, because supply chain disruptions were taking place all the time. And then, so initially in the short term, they started having small contracts given to small companies, women-owned companies, and so on. But then subsequently, of course, it had to be followed through with very large, big infrastructure contracts. And this also meant that there was an emphasis on green products, green projects, the kind that Mr. Batra was talking about a few minutes ago. There was an emphasis on resilience of supply chains, global supply chains that was sort of breaking down almost on a daily basis. And it was clear that global supply chains had to be improved if the world was to face another crisis. So it was clear that the governments had to balance immediate needs with long-term strategic solutions, particularly in green transitions and in digital transitions. So these are not easy policy choices. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, what was the extent of these crises? You would see from the left chart that even after 16 weeks of the crisis, which is more than 4 months of the crisis, the change in sales over the previous year, there was negative, and was negative by a large amount, almost 40%. But it was not affecting all the sectors equally. Small and micro firms, and particularly those owned by women and other disadvantaged sections of society, youth, for example, or other disadvantaged groups and so on, they actually faced the decline much more than the other ones did. Sectors like hospitality, food services, and retail, they show the largest declines. And these are, unfortunately, these are also sectors where the smaller enterprises play a larger role than in other sectors. So, the impact, the social impact, the environmental impact actually was very big as a result of those crises. So have we learned something? Can we go to the next slide, please? This was a study that was done by McKinsey in 2018, so before the crisis. And they took various sectors, and they said, okay, where can procurement make the largest savings or the largest impact? And they found that the largest impact would actually be made in public sector, where almost 28%, and 28% is a huge figure, 28% of of procurement expenditure can be optimized by better purchasing practices, by better procurement practices. So by far, public sector was number one, compared to automotive sectors or pharmaceuticals and so on. This, in my view, is one of the most compelling findings of this study, where savings from purchasing optimization have the greatest impact, and therefore this brings into sharp focus the need for procurement reforms in the public sector. I mean, procurement reforms are extremely important in the private sector as well, but I think the impact, the scale of impact of reforms in the public in procurement practices in the public sector are very significant, and they impact everyday citizens. Can we go to the next slide, please? Because that is important. And the study also found that if we were to have a graph with time to impact on one axis and the disruptive effect on the other axis, then procurement is right there in the third quadrant, in the strategic quadrant. And what McKinsey found was that it is actually possible to give a figure to this. At a time when they did it in 2018 or 2019, they gave a figure of $3.5 trillion. They said this is the missed opportunity, or I mean, this is the the productivity opportunity. The world can save $3.5 trillion. This $3.5 trillion is the kind of money that can be made available to the globe through improvements in procurement. Please remember the total volume of ODA throughout the world, including all the MDBs, all the bilateral donors put together, is 1/10 of this. So we are talking about procurement practices making such a huge difference. $3.5 trillion. Please remember this figure. $3.5 trillion is roughly the GDP of the entire continent of Africa. Can we go to the next slide, please? And now we'll come to the meat of this presentation. I realize that I have only about 15 more minutes before I take questions. I'll try to finish this in this time. So let us now turn to the main topic of this presentation. We have seen that international procurement is key to businesses. It is key to the government activities, but it also offers a number of challenges. And we are going to talk a little bit about these challenges. For example, we have regulatory and legal barriers, how different countries have complex procurement rules, and that makes international compliance difficult. There are currency and financial risks, different currencies that behave differently, sometimes very erratically. Exchange rate variations, again, a part of the currency risks. There are cultural and communication barriers, and these are not trivial issues. Practices, cultures vary. How the West does businesses and how the East does businesses can be very significant. And we are going to be discussing this in subsequent slides a little bit. And then there can, of course, be delays because of supply chain disruptions. We have seen this happen, and the enormous cost that it presents to the businesses, to the governments, and so on. But these challenges, they require strategies that are adaptive. And why are they important? Because the risks have to be managed, and the procurement processes have to be made smoother. Can we go to so we are going to be discussing each one of them in some detail. So, for example, when we talk about the regulatory and legal barriers, the companies face difficulties in navigating very complex procurement or trade barriers that happen in international trade. There are trade laws, there are tariffs that sort of sometimes vary from one country to the other. There has been, in recent years, an effort to harmonize many of those, but those efforts have been somewhat limited, and with limited success. If you do not know the laws, then sometimes you could make mistakes, and that could invite penalties, that could invite delays. Sometimes countries are also parts of international treaties like the WTO's GPA, the World Trade Organization's Government Procurement Agreement, and that lays an extra layer of complexity. And then delays are also caused by very complex bureaucratic processes. Certain forms to be filled and have been triplicate or in 4 copies, and a copy going somewhere, and then that being paired with something else, and so on. A case in point is, the ever-changing scenarios of tariffs between US and China. I'm taking this because these are the two largest economies in the world. When this happens, the companies obviously that have nothing to do with these changes, have to reassess their own strategies. For example, if there has been a tariff change that takes place, let us say, between US and China, and US has made tariffs more expensive for certain kinds of goods from China, then the US companies will have to delay shipments because suddenly the cost will go up. It may have to search for alternative suppliers or negotiate better prices. Similarly, Chinese exporters might face delays that they face new market conditions. They suddenly find that buyers from the US are no longer interested, so they have to buy new buyers. They have to find new buyers. They have to perhaps deal with increased customs scrutiny, which means sometimes greater delays and so on. These changes require time to implement and leading to delays in for example, if I have committed to someone that I'm going to supply something in 2 weeks' time, and I'm not able to do that, well, that impacts not only the supply chain, it impacts my own credibility as well, and of course the production line and the bottlenecks in the production line. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, this is straightforward. Currency and financial risks are the kind of risks that we see on a daily basis. Currencies, there are countries that insist on using their own currencies. Many of them are, they are tradable. Many of them are not. So that of course is a business decision that the suppliers have to take. But then currency fluctuations, even in established currencies, can have an impact on the bottom line, on the cost that a company is paying. You may find that there are multiple suppliers from multiple countries, and a bid that is considered to be low today may not be low in a couple of weeks' time when the currency appreciates. So so that those the companies have to take financial engineering solutions to take care of these things. For example, they hedge currency risk with financial instruments like forwards and so on. Now, financial planning also becomes difficult because sometimes the practices are different. Sometimes suppliers are operating in unfamiliar circumstances, so that makes a difference as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, okay, so this is again an extremely, it's a non-trivial thing. It appears simple, cultural, language, and communication barriers, but believe me, they're not trivial. They are significant. They sometimes complicate interactions and negotiations between international players. For example, practices, how the language is used, how certain words are used, they sometimes lead to misunderstandings, misinterpretations. In negotiations, with complicated legal agreements, there are countries that use bid, there are countries that use tender. There are, other changes, sometimes when you are speaking on phone, words that may be offensive in one culture may not be offensive in the other culture, and so on. So those things are important, particularly for companies that do not deal with international suppliers on a very regular basis. So that becomes very important. There are cultural norms and practices, that the West follows a different kind of practice than, let's say, the East. Etiquettes can be different. For instance, pace of business decisions can vary very different across cultures. There are countries, or there are regions where decision making is very fast, very professional, and there are places where it takes time, where it is a more involved process and so on, and that has an impact on the overall deal. There can be communication delays, time zones. It is right now, it is very early morning here, and it is late afternoon in India, and close to evening in eastern part of the globe. There can be reliance. These days, if there are huge time differences, then most of the time you deal with written communication, which are non-verbal communication, and sometimes it leads to information being lost or misunderstood. and it sometimes can lead to slowing down of the procurement process. And finally, trust and relationship building. As I said, this is again a cultural issue where the words that you use, how you deal with people and so on, can have an impact on on how the deals are being made. So effective relationships sometimes are hard to have to make across borders. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we have the logistical and operational challenges. The supply chain in disruptions, as we mentioned, can have significant adverse impact. So let's talk about a few of them. Increased cost. So if, let us say, there is a supply chain that is already established and that's been cut for some reason, because the borders are closed or whatever happens. Now, because of this, you suddenly have to, you have to look for alternative supply chains. This could lead to delays. When there are delays, the receiver has shortages, and therefore they have to find something. They will probably need to have expedited shipping. Things that were all right if a shipping was taking 4 weeks or 5 weeks, that was all right earlier, suddenly now has to be airlifted because there are shortages that at the receiving end. Or sometimes you have to reroute the things. So instead of one direction, you have to take it from the other direction because either there is a war or instability in some part of the globe and so on. So that has an impact. Supply shortages. The production line is dependent on a specific equipment or materials, raw materials, and so on and so forth. And if there's a shortage there, the entire production line can be affected, and therefore you need to have this. Sometimes you buy it from alternative suppliers at higher cost, perhaps at reduced quality, and so on. This causes production delays, production losses, loss of credibility, loss of revenue, and so on. Contractual penalties. You have already committed to supply something based on your assumption that there would be supplies that will be received in time. They have not. If you are not able to fulfill a commitment, that might lead to reputational losses. And therefore, sometimes companies are forced to reassess their strategies. So if I have found that a particular supply chain has been ineffective or has been unreliable, then I'll have to perhaps look for a different route. That could mean a different strategy. That could mean different players. And it could mean having different suppliers and increasing inventory levels because you do not want to be in a situation where you have shortages that impact your production schedules and so on. So you'll probably end up buying, more, keeping more inventory, and inventory costs can be significant. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we have, very briefly, and I must say somewhat superficially talked about the challenges. Let's also talk about the opportunities. I mean, it's not all black. There are, there are areas where, international procurement also provides a huge amount, and that is why international procurement is so popular today. So, for example, it is possible for companies to access cutting edge technology. So what cutting edge technology may not be available because of the lack of incentives or that level of economic growth in that particular country, but could be available in some other place. So accessing those markets means that you have access to cutting edge technologies or processes when you are dealing with international suppliers. Sometimes, for the West has found that suppliers on the East are able to supply the same goods with the same quality at lower prices. So, you are able to reduce your own cost by accessing suppliers that are able to supply raw material or semi-finished products and all that at lower cost, while maintaining the high qualities and so on. And there is also the possibility of accessing innovation. As you know, the European Union, for example, has put a great deal of push on innovation. So, by innovating products, by innovating processes and so on, the entire globe is able to benefit because it has access to through international trade to those suppliers as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, as you had mentioned, lowering costs through international sourcing involves purchasing goods and services from foreign suppliers. Why is that important? Because many of those suppliers have lower production costs, they have lower labor costs, they have lower material costs. Now, if that happens, if because of the economic condition of a country which is more labor dependent than machine dependent and so on, and therefore the labor cost is lower, the production cost is lower, so you are able to get high standard of quality products at lower rates from international suppliers, and that increases your own profitability as well. You are able to be more competitive because you have access to more competitive markets. The and this is particularly true in those, if you are in a monopoly kind of a situation where the cost to entry is very high, and that's a different thing. But otherwise, if you're in a very competitive market which is very price sensitive, then these factors become important. So the overall goal, of course, in most cases is to have the right balance between cost and quality, uh, and as a result of this, be remaining competitive and relevant in the market. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, international procurement, we had mentioned this. It facilitates global, innovative firms. It facilitates access to innovation, technology, by allowing companies to access, those countries or those technologies that may not be available in your own country. And this is very, very important for remaining competitive. We know that a lot of trade that takes place today is through innovation. And through innovation, you can not only have better products, you can also have a more diversified set of products. You can optimize your operations, and then within your own home market, you can drive. You can pass on that innovation. You can have more technological advancement because the world is now a village. So this not only enhances the company's own innovative capabilities, because if you have access to innovation, your own innovation also increases. But it also distributes new technological products and the advantages of new technology across different regions that may not be so technologically advanced as the countries that are exporting those technological solutions. So, and this is not happening. R&D collaboration is taking place. India is a great example, where R&D collaboration from various companies, various technological giants is taking place in Indian cities, and that is helping not only India. It's not only helping the country, the mother companies, but it's also helping the entire world, because those solutions are ultimately being passed on through international trade to other countries as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? And then this is extremely important, and this was shown in very stark contrast, in a very stark way during the COVID crisis, which is the need for supply diversification. If there is international trade, then the number of suppliers, then not only the number, but also the diversity of the suppliers increases. So if one region closes down, you have the other region to access. And therefore, your risks because of your dependence on a specific supplier or a specific set of suppliers comes down significantly. And business is nothing if not risk management. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, this is also a very important point. The ethical standards, the labor standards, the ILO standards that most countries have now signed on to. Are now becoming more and more relevant in international trade. So there is an increasing focus on sourcing ethically, on sourcing, where human rights are involved in the social contract as we speak, and to ensure compliance with newly evolving and being accepted labor and environmental standards. As I said, the core labor conditions of the ILO, which were introduced about 70 or 80 years ago, which were not signed by many countries in for the first 50 years or 60 years, have now become almost global standards. There's also a rise of green procurement initiatives, particularly in the EU, where, as you know, public procurement spend is aligned with the environmental goals. Large number of companies or governments implementing sustainable procurement practices. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'll try to finish off in the next 5 minutes or so. So this is the case study, which is it is a real case study. I'm obviously not giving the name of the companies. So there was a technology company in the US which it reduced its production costs significantly by outsourcing component manufacturing to Southeast Asia. And this is not an isolated case. This is a case that we see on a daily basis. And in this particular case, this actually allowed this company to survive, not only to survive, but to thrive, because it saved millions, tens of millions of dollars while maintaining product quality. Because the inspection standards of this company were very high. Pre-shipment inspection used to take place. Post-shipment inspection was also done. When they were satisfied with the quality of the products, they still found that they were saving tens of millions of dollars. Another company diversified its supply base to include partners across multiple continents, multiple countries across continent within the same continent. And because of this, suddenly if there is a crisis, either a health crisis or a geopolitical event that takes place, instability and so on in one part of the globe, in a region, then the impact is going to be much less than if you were dependent on supplies only in that particular region. And for example, this had a huge impact. I mean, the first few months of COVID, I think everyone was paralyzed. But then subsequently, we saw that alternative routes started coming up, and they helped the globe sort of get back on its feet rather well. So these are examples that show that strategic procurement decisions can create competitive advantage and long-term value. Can we have the next slide, please? So what are the conclusions? So to summarize, procurement has challenges. So international procurement has challenges, like regulatory risks, logistics, financial risk, currency risk, and so on. But they have also significant opportunities for innovation, for cost savings, and for inclusivity. Very important, when we talk about a globe that is becoming, more unjust, or where the difference between the top 5% and the bottom 5% is increasing. Inclusivity through public procurement becomes very important. So one can only encourage proactive strategies for navigating this evolving global procurement landscape. And this is a complex landscape. And emphasizing, so that we have across the globe companies that follow good ethical practices, good inclusive practices, and good sustainable practices. So this actually brings me to the end of my presentation. Can we have the next slide, please? Which is, I thank all of you for your attention. I know that I really have only 2 or 3 minutes that are remaining from my time, but in this time, if there are any questions or any comments, as I said, this is a very, very, very simplified version of what a complex international procurement scenario looks like. But within this, if there are any comments, I would be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have a question. So it goes like, in what ways can government policies support sustainable procurement to stimulate economic growth?
Excellent question. And, I wish we could have, I mean, this is a question that could take, hours to answer. And this is a question that I'll try to answer in the next couple of minutes. As you know, sustainability has multiple dimensions. The 3 main dimensions are economic sustainability, the social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. Now, when Mr. Krishnan talked about value as distinct from cost, Please remember, value is what you get, cost is what you pay. Okay, so the value for the same cost may have different values for different people. Now, it, so in countries, particularly in the lower level of the development scale, it is very important for them to have inclusion, for example, financial inclusion, prosperity that is more inclusive, and so on, and poverty that sort of. And there, if you have policies that are more sustainable, either economically, through, for example, through life cycle costing, or they are more sustainable socially because you are deliberately having policies that are impacting the youth, the poor, the disadvantaged sections of society, the women, and all that. You're essentially raising their level, through, there is the big word today is localization, whether it is possible to have more local purchasing by more local players and so on. And then finally, through environmental this thing, because the cost of environment is a cost that the world is bearing. So if when you have policies that do not go to the extreme, we are not talking about a policy that protects the market completely, because that ultimately is a no-brainer. You're really not going to get anywhere if you have all the economic activity, and then it becomes an inward-looking policy. But if you have a policy that is sensible, that sort of that assesses that there is a cost to protection, to having protection, but at the same time the value or the benefits of that protection, they outweigh the cost, then that benefits. And we have seen examples where such policies have actually helped countries grow, have societies become more equitable, have benefit local economies and so on, and generally economies in general.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sharma. Can we squeeze in one small question as well?
Of course.
So how do you see procurement paradigm taking into account ESGs?
Okay. Now, this is, the World Bank has been very active on this. The environmental and social goals that are, that have been implemented in public procurement across the world, not driven, largely by the World Bank, but also by the European Union, the UNCITRAL laws, or the academic work that's being done by the University of Nottingham, by other places and so on, has had, and of course, the prime example, I think, is the new procurement laws that are taking place in South Africa. Those, those are things that are not nice to do any longer. These are things that have to become a lexicon of a public procurement practitioner, and more importantly, in policymakers today. And it is very clear when we talk about $13-14 trillion of expenditure, of public expenditure, we really cannot assume that this is okay, cannot say that these are all the transactional activities, these are all the administrative activities where you have a set of rules, you follow them and all that. They have to be used as a strategic tool to bring about a more just society, a more economically capable society, a society which can stand on its feet and so on. So for me, these considerations are going to be an integral part, not an add-on to a procurement policy, but a critical component of the procurement policy itself. And I have been speaking about this earlier, but I think it bears repetition that the need for a global platform where all these things can be discussed, something which I call the global procurement partnership platform, is more critical today than it was at any given time. I know that there have been steps towards this, and I hope that they are successful, because I think it is important that we bring all the stakeholders together, with varying interests and all that, and come out with a dialogue which includes everyone and which ultimately benefits the globe.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sharma, for patiently answering all our questions.